You're listening to World War II, Above and Below. Hello everyone and welcome to World War II, Above and Below. The video version of this podcast includes historical photographs and footage of the 78th Fighter Group, mixed in with gameplay from IL-2 Sturmovik Great Battles, a World War II combat flight sim. The gameplay footage is my friends and I flying Mustangs and Thunderbolts painted up in the markings of the 78th Fighter Group, all of which are historically accurate paint schemes. There will be some statistics presented in this video, and that might be easier to see in a video rather than me reading it through audio. For those interested in my research material, check the description of the platform you are listening to this on. Only on few occasions did I use accounts written several years after the war. Links to 78th Fighter Group footage are also provided below, including high-quality gun camera reels in color from P-51 missions flown by the 78th from March through April 1945, so be sure to check those out. Included with reference material will be a list of the lexicon used. World War II, especially World War II aviation, had a lot of slang. An example of this would be the word jug. That was the nickname for the P-47 Thunderbolt. If you get confused on any of those terms, you can refer to the list in the description. With housekeeping done, let's get to it. World War II, Above and Below presents stories of the 78th Fighter Group. Episode 2, Thunderbolts to Mustangs. I will not be taking a deep dive into comparing performance evaluations of either aircraft. There are far more intelligent people than me who can go over the technical aspects of the P-47 and P-51. I am not here to determine which was better, but to explore what it was like for the 78th to transition from the P-47 into the P-51, the last 8th Air Force Fighter Group to do so. The information presented to you is comprised of 78th Fighter Group reports written during the war by pilots, ground crew, armorers, and radio technicians of air service squadrons. Personal memoirs written long after the war are solely limited to my interviews with Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewitt. I have also included excerpts from his book Target of Opportunity, which he wrote in the mid-1990s, using his detailed diary from the war, along with combat flight logs and personally written after-action reports. Hewitt arrived as an early replacement pilot in September 1943 with the 78th Fighter Group. Between that time and April 1945, Hewitt accumulated 144 combat missions in P-47s and P-51s. He amassed 400 combat hours through 2 tours, then signed on for an additional 50 combat hour extension when the 78th converted to the P-51. He became commanding officer of the 82nd Fighter Squadron on March 20th, 1945, and held this position through VE Day. With the exception of a 10-day leave in February 1945, Richard Hewitt flew most of the P-51 missions carried out by the 78th Fighter Group. Lieutenant Colonel Hewitt provides a unique perspective in this story, and thus why I've included a lot of his testimony, some of which was recorded years after the war. Before we begin, I should also point out that transition was not a new thing to the 78th Fighter Group, and I would be remiss not to mention this. They had already done this earlier in the war. Back in January of 1943, after arriving in England with the P-38 Lightning, the 78th had them taken away by the 12th Air Force to replace losses in North Africa. Along with these planes, several pilots who arrived with the original group were also transferred with those P-38s. Under the hierarchy of the 8th Air Force, 14 of the 15 fighter groups that made up the 8th Fighter Command would end up flying the P-51 Mustang before war's end. The last unit to make this transfer was the 78th Fighter Group, leaving just the 56th as the only non-Mustang outfit in the 8th Air Force by war's end. General Jimmy Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force, was an advocate for the Mustang upon learning about its success when paired with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Change was eventually coming for the 78th. Their wait just ended up being the longest. The word came on November 1st, 1944. Group Commander Colonel Fred Gray gathered his pilots and broke the news. The 78th were trading in their beloved P-47s for the P-51 Mustang the following month.
The Mustang, the P-51, longest range fighter in the world. Speed, fast climb, quick dive, tight turn. A fighter pilot's dream.
For some 8th Air Force outfits, this transition was less than sentimental. In early 1944, Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group couldn't wait to offload the Thunderbolt and get into the Mustang. For context, it is important to point out the timeline for aircraft transitions among fighter groups. Variants of the P-47 Thunderbolt that the 78th went into combat with during April 1943 were much different in terms of performance from the variants they flew in the final days of 1944. The 78th had many iterations of the P-47, in particular the D model. Despite being the heaviest single-engine, single-seat fighter of World War II, the P-47 had plenty of attributes the pilots of the 78th appreciated. For one, the jug was extremely rugged. Stories of shot-up engines with completely blown-out cylinders over Germany and flying home to Duxford were not uncommon. So too are examples of an extremely sturdy airframe that overcame instances of being hit by multiple 20mm cannon shells, and the heavy armor plate covering the pilot's backside also provided insurance in the event of being bounced from dead astern. 8 50 caliber machine guns was devastating firepower for just about anything on the receiving end. Its stability as a gun platform complemented its firepower. The Thunderbolt could also carry a combination of bombs, rockets, and external fuel tanks, making it extremely versatile. Its powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine was boosted by a turbo supercharger that only made it better the higher it climbed.
American fighter planes based in England, operating in the skies of Western Europe against the German Air Force. This is the P-47, the Thunderbolt, a fast, tough, high-altitude fighter with a dive like its name and an 8-gun blast in its wings.
A high roll rate and dive speed made it a fearsome adversary in an air battle. While not the ideal dogfighter, a capable P-47 pilot could hold its own in a turn fight with decent altitude and speed against the Bf-109 and FW-190. It was an all-around excellent aircraft, and while not the highest-scoring group in the ranks of the 8th Fighter Command, the 78th did claim 400 aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground while flying the Jug. In their year and a half with the Thunderbolt, the 78th came to love it more and more as the aircraft got better. Something that fighter groups who transitioned away from it earlier did not experience. The engine saw improvements. The addition of paddle props helped the rate of climb. Razorbacks were replaced by bubble tops, and range was steadily increased by larger fuel tanks both internally and externally. While also bearing in mind that air superiority, and later air supremacy, had been achieved at this stage of the war in Europe, it is understandable as to why there was reluctance and dread from the 78th on converting to the Mustang. If the Thunderbolt got them this far, why was it time to go to the P-51? Nonetheless, change was coming in December 1944. Webster describes a Mustang as a small, hardy horse of the western plains. I'd say it was more like a pinto pony with the power of a Clydesdale. I was often asked which of the two, Jug or Mustang, I thought was the best. Each did the job they were designed to do. There were times I wish I had been in the other's seat, but I'd never, ever downplay either. Unless you have been there and done both, best to keep a zipped lip. Sitting here today, I'll just say, thank you, Republic Aircraft and North American Aviation. You are both one of the main reasons I am here today. Richard Hewitt, 78th Fighter Group, 82nd Fighter Squadron. On the same day as Hitler's counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest igniting the Battle of the Bulge, the first Mustangs had arrived at RAF Duxford, the 78th Fighter Group's home in East Anglia, on December 16, 1944. Service squadrons were assigned to install pressurized kits for wing tanks, hookups for the new G-suit, tail warning radar, and K-14 gyro gun sights. While weather was poor in the English skies during that winter, pilots of the 78th logged as many hours as they could in their new steeds. There were a couple of days not really clear enough to fly that we finagled a traffic pattern flight. We flew once around at barely 500 feet, just able to keep the field in view. With our move into 51s, everyone was anxious to get any kind of airtime they could. I managed to get 2 such flights, and just to get the feel of landing this new bird was worth every second. It had torque that would literally screw you into the ground if you failed to fully compensate with right rudder trim before you hit the throttle. I'd say ask Rich Rowe, a hotshot 82nd pilot during my tenure as commanding officer, if he is still around. He pranged 3 times on takeoff from the Mustang's violent torque. Captain Richard Hewitt, 78th Fighter Group, 82nd Fighter Squadron. The Pea Soup kept the 78th grounded for most of December. As more Mustangs were ferried to Duxford, missions, when flown, were still in the P-47. It was not until December 29, 1944, when the first P-51 combat mission took to the skies. The 84th Fighter Squadron, however, retained their P-47s because they had not received their quota of Mustangs yet. And the last kill scored by a P-47 Thunderbolt of the 78th Fighter Group was done the following day when Captain Julius Maxwell shot down an FW-190 just west of Hamburg. Maxwell's claim was number 400 for the group up to that point in the war. When Captain Maxwell landed back at Duxford, it marked the end of an era. This was the final mission for the Thunderbolt with the 78th Fighter Group. Like pulling a starting pitcher, it was time for the Mustang to close out the final frames. As if the bad weather weren't enough of a hindrance, engine problems plagued the P-51s for all of January. In the 19 missions flown that month, 9 Mustangs were lost, 8 of which due to engine failures. Pilots weren't the only ones who needed to figure out the kinks with these new airplanes. Ground crews worked all day and night to keep them in the air. Inboard spark plugs were changed one mission, and outboard spark plugs the next. It would take over a month to get these teething problems fixed. However, it was not all doom and gloom that month. The 78th performed exceptionally well on January 14, 1945, when their Mustangs sparred with BF-109s and the newer and improved FW-190 Doras of JG-26. Southwest of Cologne, at an altitude of 26,000 feet, pilots from the 84th Squadron spotted some 15-plus enemy fighters at low altitude, easily silhouetted by the snow-covered ground. The Germans were dogfighting with P-47s of the 366th Fighter Group when they were pounced on by the 78th. This low-altitude shootout resulted in a triumph that was much needed for the Duxford Eagles. JG-26 records indicate 7 FW-190 Doras and 4 BF-109s lost, aligning with the claims from the 84th Fighter Squadron. The 83rd Squadron from the 78th shot down another 3 FW-190s at an airfield near Diepholz. January 14, 1945, proved to be the first major win of the 78th's transition to the Mustang. Even though pilots liked the P-47, they were fast liking the 51s because they are easy to fly and have greater range. With this advantage, we hope to be able to boost our total victories and catch up with some of the groups who are ahead of us. 79th Service Group Monthly Historical Report, January 31, 1945. The January 14th mission might have seemed like an anomaly at the time for the 78th. The Mustang's range allowed extra loiter time over Germany, but unfortunately few, if any, opportunities presented themselves, and no air kills were claimed for all of February. While engine issues were getting worked out, losses to strafing increased. Statistically, February 1945 was one of the worst months of operations for the 78th. 21 pilots were reported missing, 10 becoming prisoners of war, 4 evading capture, and 7 killed. The only other time losses exceeded these amounts was during September 1944 when the group was flying low-level support missions during Operation Market Garden. Morale was low, and the group needed a boost. The consolation prize that came out of February ended up becoming exactly what the 78th needed. A popular commanding officer, Colonel Fred Gray, was transferred out of the group in January, and temporarily replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Olin Gilbert. Gilbert's tenure was short-lived when he stepped back to executive officer. This change made room for the new CO, Lieutenant Colonel John Landers. The 78th had received the right leader at the right time. Landers came to Duxford with an impressive record. Flying P-40s over New Guinea in 1942, Landers shot down 6 Japanese aircraft before being shot down himself. After a week in the jungle aided by locals, Landers made it back to Australia and was transferred home. Once completing P-38 training, he set off to England in 1944 for assignment with the 8th Air Force. His second tour saw him fly with 2 different units and 2 different aircraft. The first being in the 55th Fighter Group, outfitted with the P-38 Lightning. Here, Landers shot down 4 Germans before being transferred to the 357th, a P-51 outfit filled with aces like Bud Anderson, Chuck Yeager, and Richard Peterson. In his 3 months with the 357th, Landers shot down another German aircraft. Between 2 combat tours, one in the Pacific and one in Europe, flying 3 different types of aircraft, the P-40, P-38, and P-51, Landers racked up over 100 missions with 11 kills to his tally. He again was sent home in December 1944. A tall, soft-spoken Texan, Landers was immediately recognized as the man who could quickly elevate a group low in the morale department. Wherever Landers flew, he had a habit of stirring up a Japanese or German hornet's nest. No, I don't carry any kind of luck charm. I don't know where my luck in finding enemy planes comes from. Some of the other group commanders claimed that if they dropped me into a barrel of lard, I'd bump into a Nazi plane. Lieutenant Colonel John Landers. Whether it is luck or whether the 78th Group's commanding officer can smell the rats, as some have claimed, is beyond the scope of this history. The fact remains that within 1 month after assuming command, the colonel had led the group into 2 luscious gaggles of German planes, both of which were apparently forming up in preparation for attacks on American bombers. The P-51 Mustang pilots destroyed 45 of the enemy fighters, 32 of them in 1 day for a new group air record. 78th Fighter Group History Diary, March 1945. It took only a short time for Landers to turn around the conditions within the 78th Fighter Group. From his arrival on February 22nd, within the first week of taking command, he had flown 4 of the 6 assigned missions to the 78th. This immediately earned him the respect of his men, and despite privileges of rank, Landers flew on the majority of the 78th's missions for the remainder of the war. With a new leader who flew from the front, a breath of fresh air was about to be given to the 78th. March 2nd, 1945 marked the coming out party for the Mustang. While engaging an estimated 24 Bf-109s at 10,000 feet over Berg, Germany, the new group commander flying his famous P-51 named Big Beautiful Doll quickly dispatched 2 Nazi fighters. Lieutenant Duncan McDuffie, an element leader within Landers' flight, shot down another 4 109s. Like their big score back in January, the 78th pilots were reminded of what made the Mustang so special. For Richard Hewitt, a veteran of 2 combat tours, noticed something about the P-51 that he felt the Thunderbolt couldn't do as well. Dogfighting at altitude, there was very little difference. But at lower altitude, no comparison. You get the A here, Mustang. As kills racked up, maintenance crews started to score victories of their own. The spark plug issues, which were the cause of several accidents in January and February, were finally remedied. We had a lot of problems with the American plugs in the Maytag Messerschmitts. These fouled up quite a lot, and we had to change all the plugs after every show. The rough-running engines and power loss could be critical for the pilots. Then word got out that the British plugs didn't foul. This resulted in a lot of private negotiations with RAF types to swap out plugs for other items. Finally, the Army caught up with reality, and we were able to obtain them legally. Staff Sergeant James Accardi, 78th Fighter Group, Crew Chief. Spring 1945 is an important time within the history of the 78th Fighter Group. By the end of March, the 78th had claimed 492 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground. With a promise by the ranking officers, the 78th would have a party to end all parties once number 500 was scored. Come April, they would celebrate this achievement as well as flying their 450th mission, nearly on the same day of their 2-year anniversary of starting combat operations back in 1943. Those were the outstanding news events of the month, but taking precedence over these magnificent events in this observer's opinion was the resurgence of enthusiasm and lifting of morale among the personnel of the station. In December 1944, this history noted that morale had hit bottom, and in January 1945, stated that it had come up somewhat. 78th Fighter Group Headquarters, March 1945 report. Upon his arrival, John Landers made an immediate impact. The kinks of the P-51 Mustang had been worked out, and the skepticism of a Jonah were now a thing of the past in the 78th Fighter Group. Each step closer to Berlin undoubtedly played a factor in this positive uptick, but in many ways it started at the top. The fact that Lieutenant Colonel Landers came in with an impressive record and that victory piled on victory during March leads many to suppose that the spell is broken, and the anniversary celebration, emphasizing past success of this group, will help out. The presence of one or two top-notch men will convince the whole outfit that it is hot, and the results of such enthusiasm are likely to be encouraged to say the least. 78th Fighter Group Headquarters, March 1945 report. In March alone, they'd shot down 54 enemy aircraft in 25 missions, with 14 losses to all causes, most due to strafing. While losses were still high, victories were even higher than they had ever been before. The end was in sight, but the red-hot 78th Fighter Group wasn't quite done yet. Paired with the shortage of pilots, the systematic destruction of Nazi Germany's oil production facilities, airfields, and communication centers kept the Luftwaffe mostly grounded for the final months of the war. Luftwaffe air units put down wrenches and picked up rifles as they were pressed into the infantry. The writing had been on the wall for months, but the end was very near, with the Soviets closing in from the east and the Western Allies crossing over the Rhine in masses. Regardless, there were still missions to fly. April 16, 1945 will forever live on in the 78th Fighter Group lore. It is on this day that the 78th attacks 5 Luftwaffe airfields at Prague and Pilsen in Czechoslovakia. By the end of this 7-hour, 40-minute-long mission, pilots from the group would claim 135 Nazi aircraft destroyed on the ground. Unfortunately, this came at the loss of 2 pilots, Captains Robert Holmes and Manfred Croy. The 78th was awarded its second Distinguished Unit Citation for this action. 4 days later, the 8th Air Force leaders issued a strafing ban directive to the 8th Fighter Command, as flak still produced losses, and Allied ground forces were overrunning several of the Luftwaffe airfields. The final mission for the 78th came on April 25, 1945, escorting RAF Lancasters and Mosquitoes that would bomb Hitler's Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. Despite not firing a shot in anger, 1 pilot was lost. Second Lieutenant Edward Carroll aborted the mission shortly after takeoff. While attempting to return to Duxford in heavy fog, he went into some trees and was immediately killed on impact. This was the final casualty suffered by the 78th Fighter Group during the war. Just over a week later, Nazi Germany had surrendered. So how did the Mustang do in its time with the 78th Fighter Group? During the 4-month period of combat missions in the P-51 from December 29, 1944 to April 25, 1945, pilots claimed 74 air kills and destroyed another 190 aircraft on the ground. 6 Mustangs were lost in air-to-air combat, and another 32 to strafing, 19 to other causes, and 5 in accidents. All these figures amount to 62 Mustangs lost operationally. Much akin to the transition from the P-38 to the P-47, pilots at first were reluctant of the Mustang. The Thunderbolt was a familiar aircraft to them. After a brutal January 1945, things looked bleak. While the Mustang had its attributes, it was found to be less forgiving and fragile when compared to the Jug. The losses for the Mustang can be tied to a few elements. One would be the transition to a new aircraft during the winter of late 1944 and early 1945. This experience was also shared by the maintenance crews who battled the spark plug problems during the first full month of P-51 operations. Another is that the Mustang's fuel capacity allowed for extra loiter time over enemy territory, flying further distances than they had before in the P-47. Despite being under constant harassment from the Western and Eastern Allies, the Germans always seemed to have adequate amounts of anti-aircraft artillery around. With a bullet in the right place, the Mustang, like any other World War II fighter with an inline engine, was vulnerable to any kind of damage to the cooling system. The further you were from home, the more difficult it was to make it back with engine damage. The loss figures to AAA show this, and no less than an average of 8 aircraft were lost to strafing per month during the Mustang's time in the 78th. So could the 78th have finished off World War II in the P-47? Absolutely. And there were definitely a few pilots who felt that way. But the Mustang was still very much loved by those who flew her. Like the Thunderbolt, the Mustang had its upside and weaknesses. In its short amount of time, it left an impact on the record of the 78th Fighter Group. To end this video, my friend Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewitt summed it up best at the end of his book. There is a chapter where he compares the Thunderbolt and Mustang, and I recommend you pick up a copy of Target of Opportunity to read about his experiences. You could compare them to the two apples, Jonathan's and Cortland's. I'd take either. Both were great. They are why I am here today. So thank you, North American Aviation and Republic Aircraft. Without both of you, we could not have ended it over there as soon as we did. And I would most likely not be here boasting about what truly great fighter aircraft you both were. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewitt, 78th Fighter Group. 4 air kills, 144 combat missions. Tune in next month on Friday, June 6th for Episode 3, where I will be going into the history of the 78th on D-Day and the days which followed. You've been listening to World War II Above and Below. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and Instagram. See you next time.